Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marta Conde. I am a researcher based now at Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, and I'm also the president of Research&Degrowth. This is an organization that we research on the growth, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to be here with you in this presentation of the vocabulary for the growth book, and I'm glad that you can finally read it in your own language. I also want to give an apology because I don't have a fancy presentation with me speaking on the side with a PowerPoint presentation, but it's just me. Today I've been asked to talk to you about the commodity frontiers and how they operate, how they are linked to extreme infrastructure, and what is the environmental and social damage that commodity extraction is bringing. So what do we mean by commodity frontiers? This is where extraction expands, colonizing new land in search of raw materials such as oil, minerals, biomass, etc., in order to meet the increasing demand of our social metabolism of industrialized economies. So the concept is not ours. It was introduced by Jason Moore, and he understood it by analyzing the expansion of early capitalism in the 15th century with the sugar commodity expansion. He explains how with early colonialism, the crowns of Portugal and Castile, Spain, were deeply indebted at that time, and this led partly to the conquest of the Atlantic, not to the colonization, and to the sugar commodity frontier expansion. So the Portuguese first landed in Madeira, an island off the coast of Africa, in the late 15th century. They were in this process. They were really testing the space. They were looking for new production systems with the objective to maximize production. The island Madeira comes from the word madeira, wood. It was covered in trees, and these first were cut to make space for planting the sugar, and this wood was sold to build boats for the construction back in Lisbon, in the capital. But then later they were used for energy supplies. So this was all the boilers to produce sugar use a lot of energy from the trees, from cutting and burning the trees. So this caused massive deforestation in the island. There was also labor was another input for the sugar production, and labor was really hard during this time. Indigenous people soon died, and wage workers and slaves were brought into the island to work on sugar, and the conditions were really awful because they were trying this new way of production and system of production, very, very intense, and this caused really massive impacts in the island. So it took only 70 years for the Portuguese to devastate the island, and they had exhausted all the inputs, and they had to look for new places to grow all this sugar and produce sugar. And so they moved into São Tomé, an island also near there, by the mid-16th century. The island was deforested in only 60 years, and they also confronted large-scale revolts. So they moved them to North Brazil in the late 16th century, and then in the mid-17th century to Barbados. So you can see the pattern developing here, no? So how does the commodity frontier work? Let's extract some key aspects. So as we saw, exhaustion, ecological exhaustion at production, no? When you use all the inputs you need for the production are exhausted, this pushes the expansion into other lands. And this search for land is usually, but not always, especially now, but especially at the time, and through the evolution of capitalism, this expansion occurred outside the capitalist economy, no? And local ecosystems, another characteristic is that local ecosystems weren't allowed to regenerate. The production was so fierce and so fast that when they soon reached falling productivity and falling profitability, pushing then the frontier further. And another characteristic which I think is very important, and I will show you a bit later also why, is that each each commodity frontier set in motion new frontiers to get the inputs they require. For example, the silver commodity frontier, that was also studied by Moore, showed that there was decline in production in all European centers. For example, there was deforestation, decline in ores, labor unrest. So in order to look for silver production, this was pushed on the colonization for the silver production in Peru. So by the 1500s, mid-1500s, Potosí, this island in present-day Bolivia, was a lead in silver production. So they looked for a new system, a new method for extracting silver, and the amalgamation system. And for that, they needed mercury. So in order to do to get this mercury for the production, they had to open a new mine, the Huancavelica mine, for the amalgamation process. So the push for the commodity frontier of sugar needed the mercury pushing the commodity frontier elsewhere. Another question I wanted to share with you is, what is the relationship between capitalism and commodity frontiers? We argue that, and Moore argues basically, that capitalism not only has frontiers, it exists through frontiers, expanding from one place to the next, transforming socio-ecological relations, producing more and more kinds of goods and services. That is how capital circulates. Because commodity frontiers are used basically to manage capitalism crisis. And this is what we're seeing right now. So we had a crisis caused in 2007, partly by the boom in construction and housing. And then after that, capital had to find another investment, other land, other people, other water to commodify. And one of these investments is big extreme infrastructure. This is the new frontier of investment, the new commodity frontier. We have projects like IRSA in Latin America, the One Silk Road in China. All these are transport and energy corridors that Xavier Sol will talk to you about. And they're designed to facilitate the exploitation and the easy extraction of resources, to transport them to Europe, to US, to Japan, to produce. And this is opening capitalism to new areas, commodifies new land, water, labor that enter then into the capitalistic industrialization process. So I want to analyze with you one of these commodity frontiers, how they operate and the impacts they cause, but with a more present-day example. One of these cases that maybe is familiar to you is the massive infrastructure plan, the Southern Gas Corridor. Is the idea that they want to extract gas from Azerbaijan and transfer it across from Azerbaijan across to Europe. Here's where in my PowerPoint I will put a map and show you all the countries it has to cross. But basically it has to cross Georgia, Turkey, Albania, Greece, and then Italy to get to Europe. And these commodity frontiers might not mean a new extraction, because it's true that gas was already extracted in Azerbaijan, but it does mean a huge expansion of the current gas field there in the Caspian Sea, because the project now is going to include 2 additional offshore platforms linked with a bridge, undersea wells, and then the expansion of the gas plant at the coast in the Caspian Sea. And not only that, then you also need to build all the pipelines that transport all this gas through Europe. And this indeed will commodify new land and impact in many, many ways communities in all its path, as we can see from the reaction of the numerous activists. So I want to use this case to show you how the community, what I was telling you before, how the community frontiers also expand due to the inputs they need, how it expands into new frontiers. So for these pipelines, the pipelines that are going to go, the TAP, the TANAP, all these pipelines that are going to transport the gas to Europe are made of high carbon steel. High carbon steel, I had to look into this, I didn't know all this, is made from iron, to which they add sulfur, phosphorus, manganese, and carbon. So iron ore is mined, and this with all the impacts mining or generally causes. I don't know if you're familiar with mining or if you've ever been to a mine, but I really recommend it because it's quite a life-changing experience to realize where all the objects that come around us, all the mine, where they come from, no? Where they come from mines, and on all the impacts they cause on water, on soil, on livelihoods. But this iron ore is not pure. It needs to go through a process called smelting. So the iron is heated until it melts, and then the impurities are separated. So this process of smelting is a highly polluting process. But for this high carbon steel, you also need sulfur. Sulfur is one of the largest productions of sulfur comes from Ijen, a quiet but active volcano in East Java in Indonesia. Apparently, there sulfur miners break off large chunks of sulfur from the crater floor and carry these chunks in large baskets on their backs nearly 3 kilometers into town. The conditions are awful, and they have massive breathing problems and health problems. Then, if you remember, for example, high carbon steel also needs manganese. Manganese, about 80% of manganese resources are found in South Africa. So I don't know if you can see what I'm getting here. So in order to build these pipelines, you need each one of these minerals, and each one of these minerals has its own commodification process, is all commodification chain. And another thing I wanted to share with you is that many of these physical commodity frontiers have been expanding for a long time. In some cases, they're reaching physical, these frontiers are being saturated. There's nowhere where capital can expand. So that the moment capital is looking to new modes of expanding, which are not tied to land. And for example, we see in the commodification of indigenous knowledge by, for example, pharmaceutical companies getting indigenous knowledge to build for medical products, for medicines. Environmental services, commodification of environmental services where they're quantified and then sold, commodification of CO2 emissions through carbon markets. So these are examples of new frontiers of accumulation. It's important to say, also wanted to share with you that all through history, since the beginning of capitalism, all this capitalist process and expansion through the community frontiers, there's been reaction, there's been contestation, there've been slave revolts, peasant revolts, feminist social movements, there's been numerous contestations through all this against this commodity frontier expansion. One of these current expressions that we've also seen through history is socio-environmental conflicts and the environmental justice conflicts. Local groups react because against this, for example, this gas project or a new mine project, because they lose their livelihoods, their way of life. But they also react to the lack of participation, to the lack of being able to take a decision on what's going to happen to the land, to the livelihoods. In Latin America, these contestations, these movements have triggered alternative views to development, because the discourse of development has been very much hand in hand with this question of growth, with this question of the commodity frontier. No? So we're expanding commodity frontiers in your land, and we're actually developing you. So these movements have been questioning growth as a social aim, and they're putting life, well-being, and nature at the center. So with the concept of the commodity frontiers, what we want to do is to visualize how capitalism works, and how the commodity frontier expansion that is supplying our growing global economy and social metabolism, it actually comes from particular places where people live and whose lives are transformed with high social and environmental cost in undescriptive and unaccountable ways. So with the growth, we want to contest the imperative of endless economic growth, and with this we can have direct and positive impact in the life of communities at these frontiers. And finally, also to point out that by making this link, we can also, this arises the opportunity to form alliances between these environmental justice movements and degrowth, because we can together think, frame of innovative alternatives to growth-based development formulas. So, well, I hope that was my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you could follow what I was saying. I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to respond to your questions or participate in the debate, but I hope that this helps start a good debate. Okay, bye.